May 28, 1942, Camp O'Donnell, Central Luzon, Philippines. Sergeant Takeshi Yamamoto had overseen prisoner death camps for 3 months, watching American soldiers die at mathematically predictable rates. 50 bodies removed daily, stacked like firewood outside the barracks. Dysentery, malaria, and starvation performing their systematic work on men who surrendered rather than die with honor. Walking through the American section that morning, Yamamoto noticed something that violated every principle of Japanese prison administration. In Barracks 7, Private James Morrison sat upright, alert, showing muscle tone that shouldn't exist after 8 weeks on starvation rations. 3 buildings away, Sergeant Robert Chen demonstrated identical physical condition. Barracks 12 contained 6 more Americans maintaining impossible health despite daily caloric intake designed to kill within 90 days. The mathematical impossibility struck Yamamoto like physical impact. These men weren't just surviving, they were thriving. 2 weeks earlier, Yamamoto had personally watched Morrison collapse during work detail, appearing near death from malnutrition. Standard Japanese calculations predicted his death within 72 hours. Instead, Morrison had somehow gained weight, regained strength, and returned to full physical capability. Through systematic observation, Yamamoto identified the pattern that shattered his understanding of prisoner psychology. The weakest Americans, those Japanese medical staff had classified as terminal cases, were receiving additional nutrition from sources the guards couldn't identify or prevent. Food was moving through invisible networks across camp sections where no communication should exist. The Americans had somehow circumvented 3 months of systematic starvation protocols through coordination the Japanese never anticipated possible. Every prisoner in the American section was operating as part of unified survival networks, using distribution systems so sophisticated that constant surveillance had failed to detect their existence. The systematic death engineering that formed the cornerstone of Japanese prison management had been completely neutralized by organizational capabilities the guards didn't know existed. American ingenuity had transformed Camp O'Donnell from certain death into survivable hell through pure collective genius. Japanese certainty about American weakness had just been rendered completely obsolete. The Imperial Japanese Army approached prisoner management with mathematical certainty derived from centuries of military culture. Bushido Code, the warrior's way, emphasized death before dishonor as fundamental military principle. Japanese soldiers rarely surrendered, viewing capture as disgrace worse than death. The 1928 edition of Principles of Strategic Command deliberately removed the words defense, retreat, and surrender from military vocabulary. The 1908 Imperial Japanese Army Criminal Code mandated death penalties for commanders who surrendered without fighting to the last man. Lieutenant Colonel Shigori Tsuneyoshi, Camp O'Donnell commandant, applied this cultural framework to American prisoners with complete confidence. Men who surrendered rather than die fighting deserved only contempt and systematic elimination. The Japanese had captured 76,000 American and Filipino troops on April 9, 1942, the largest surrender in United States military history. To Japanese military thinking, these prisoners had already dishonored themselves beyond redemption. Camp O'Donnell represented deliberate death engineering disguised as prisoner management. Originally designed as Philippine Army training facility for 10,000 men, Japanese administrators intentionally confined 60,000 plus prisoners in the same space. The mathematical calculation was precise. Overcrowding plus resource denial equals predictable mortality rates. The water infrastructure revealed the systematic nature of Japanese death camp design. A few low-yield spigots provided the sole water source for 60,000 prisoners in tropical heat. Men waited all day in lines under unrelenting sun for single canteen fills. Some prisoners collapsed or died while waiting. The spigots alternated between gushes and trickles. Pure chance determined whether hours of waiting produced water or droplets. That single canteen had to suffice for daily washing and drinking needs. Japanese administrators calculated that Americans, weakened by the 65-mile Bataan death march, would succumb within weeks to this systematic resource deprivation. Food consisted of 1 cup of rice daily, approximately 1,500 calories with 0 protein or vitamins. Medical supplies were non-existent. Sanitation facilities consisted of open pit latrines that overflowed into contaminated creek water. The creek itself ran 4 inches deep, slimy mud with water scum on top, polluted by latrine overflow and suspected corpse contamination nearby. The camp's infrastructure guaranteed mass death through disease vectors that Japanese administration understood perfectly. Dysentery, malaria, beriberi, and pellagra would systematically eliminate prisoners through dehydration, malnutrition, and vitamin deficiency. No medicine meant no treatment. No clean water meant constant reinfection. No adequate food meant progressive physical deterioration until organ failure. Hospital facilities consisted of crude bamboo structures quickly dubbed House of Horrors by American prisoners. 3 buildings with wooden floors, 2 with dirt floors until engineers scrounged lumber. No beds, no blankets, no medicine, no hope. The hospital represented merely segregation area for dying prisoners, concentration of disease that accelerated death rather than treating illness. Prisoners avoided hospitalization, preferring to take chances outside rather than face concentrated exposure to every camp disease simultaneously. Japanese expectations about American prisoner psychology reinforced their confidence in systematic death camp effectiveness. Western military forces, particularly Americans raised in individualistic capitalist society, would fragment under pressure that destroyed unit cohesion. Without senior officers to provide leadership, King and other colonels had been separated to different camps. Regular American troops would devolve into desperate individuals focused solely on personal survival. The Japanese projected their own cultural values onto American prisoners through complete misunderstanding. Japanese soldiers maintained discipline through rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience to superiors. Americans, trained in democratic military structures emphasizing individual initiative and questioning authority, would presumably lack psychological tools necessary for collective organization under extreme stress. Lieutenant Colonel Tsuneyoshi expressed this confidence directly when American officers protested camp conditions. "I hate all Americans and always will hate you," he told Chaplain Lieutenant Colonel Alfred Oliver and several other officers. "The only thing I want to know is when one of you dies, I will then see that you bury each other." The commandant refused all requests for improved conditions, viewing prisoner complaints as further evidence of American weakness and entitlement mentality. The death statistics appeared to validate Japanese expectations during Camp O'Donnell's first weeks. April 1942 saw hundreds of deaths as prisoners arrived from the death march already weakened by malnutrition, disease, and physical brutality. May 1942 brought accelerating mortality rates as camp conditions compounded existing medical conditions. Late May reached peak death rates, 40-50 Americans dying daily, Filipinos dying by hundreds. Japanese administration documented these statistics with satisfaction. The mathematical progression matched predictions derived from calculated resource deprivation combined with tropical disease environment. Within the projected 90-day timeline, American prisoners would achieve complete psychological breakdown followed by systematic physical elimination. The surrender that dishonored them at Bataan would culminate in death that removed them entirely. The cultural gap between Japanese assumptions and American reality would prove more decisive than any battlefield engagement. While Japanese administrators calculated death rates and monitored systematic elimination progress, they fundamentally misunderstood the organizational capacity and collective resilience that defined American military personnel. Japanese confidence in their death camp design approached absolute certainty. They had engineered infrastructure for mass death. They had created disease environment that medical science said should kill within predictable timeframes. They had separated American leadership and destroyed command structures. They had provided minimal resources that couldn't sustain life beyond calculated durations. What Japanese administrators never anticipated was that American military training, democratic society values, and collective problem-solving capabilities would generate survival innovations that rendered their mathematical death calculations completely obsolete. The same cultural characteristics Japanese leadership viewed as weakness, individual initiative, democratic cooperation, technological thinking, would transform into survival advantages under the exact conditions designed to exploit American psychological vulnerabilities. By late May 1942, as Japanese administrators recorded peak daily death rates and projected complete American prisoner elimination within weeks, underground American survival networks were already operational and expanding throughout the camp. The death engineering that seemed mathematically certain was about to encounter organized American resistance that Japanese military culture couldn't comprehend or counter. American prisoners at Camp O'Donnell responded to systematic death engineering with collective ingenuity that transformed Japanese disadvantages into survival opportunities. Within weeks of arrival, prisoners had established sophisticated underground networks operating beneath Japanese surveillance through pure organizational genius. The kitchen detail assignments became first priority targets for American coordination. Prisoners volunteered for cooking work despite brutal physical demands because access to food preparation areas provided critical survival advantages. Kitchen workers ate rice that stuck to cooking pots, scraped residue from serving vessels, and intercepted vegetable scraps before disposal. A single day on kitchen detail could provide 500, 800 additional calories, the difference between death and survival. Americans organized rotating kitchen assignments to distribute nutritional advantages across maximum prisoner numbers. Healthier prisoners took heavy labor positions to shield weaker men from work details that meant certain death. The rotation system ensured no prisoner received excessive exposure to starvation rations, while others gained kitchen access advantages. Food smuggling networks demonstrated American technical innovation under impossible constraints. Prisoners hid extra rice, vegetables, and occasional meat in their underwear during Japanese-approved trips outside camp boundaries. The smuggling system required precise coordination. Lookouts monitored guard positions, smugglers timed movements to avoid inspection patterns, and distribution networks immediately dispersed contraband to prevent discovery during camp searches. Underground gardens appeared throughout Camp O'Donnell as Americans applied agricultural knowledge to survival requirements. Prisoners cultivated vegetables in hidden plots using seeds smuggled from outside contacts. The gardens required constant protection from Japanese guards and fellow prisoners desperate enough to steal growing crops. Americans established guard rotations protecting gardens until harvest, then distributed produce through systematic networks prioritizing sick prisoners requiring nutrition most desperately. Animal hunting represented another American innovation, turning camp disadvantages into protein sources. Prisoners captured mice, snakes, and stray dogs entering camp areas. Any creature providing edible protein became targets for organized hunting parties. Americans fashioned crude traps from salvaged materials, established hunting territories to prevent competition, and shared captured animals through distribution networks, ensuring maximum nutritional benefit per creature. The Filipino resistance connection proved decisive for American survival. Local civilians, risking execution if discovered, smuggled quinine tablets into camp to treat malaria, ravaging prisoner populations. Americans established communication networks with Filipino contacts, coordinated smuggling timing with guard rotation patterns, and distributed medicine through underground channels, prioritizing prisoners showing malaria symptoms before the disease progressed to fatal stages. Medical care networks operated without supplies, equipment, or facilities beyond crude bamboo structures. American doctors and medics provided treatment through improvised techniques, psychological support, and organizational systems that prevented sick prisoners from dying through neglect. Healthy prisoners carried sick men to avoid abandonment in death barracks. Medical personnel organized hygiene protocols using available water to prevent disease spread. The buddy system ensured every prisoner had partners monitoring his condition and providing assistance when illness struck. Bribery networks converted pooled resources into guard corruption, producing survival advantages. Americans collected valuables, watches, rings, personal items, and strategically bribed guards for extra food, medicine access, or reduced work detail assignments. The bribery system required sophisticated coordination to identify corruptible guards, negotiate transactions without detection by Japanese officers, and distribute obtained advantages through prisoner networks rather than benefiting only individual bribery participants. Work detail organization demonstrated American military discipline, maintaining structure despite command hierarchy destruction. Prisoners self-organized into units matching capabilities to assignments. Strong men took heavy labor positions. Sick prisoners received light duty assignments. The coordination prevented Japanese guards from assigning death sentence work details to prisoners too weak for survival. Americans protected each other through collective organization that Japanese administrators never detected or prevented. Information networks provided early warning systems about Japanese inspections, guard mood changes, and policy shifts affecting prisoner welfare. Communication chains spread intelligence throughout camp sections within minutes. Americans developed signal systems for silent coordination during Japanese presence. The information advantage allowed prisoners to hide contraband before inspections, avoid guards during dangerous mood periods, and coordinate resistance without verbal communication triggering punishment. Every survival innovation emerged from collective American problem-solving rather than individual heroism. The networks required universal participation, systematic coordination, and military discipline operating beneath Japanese surveillance. Americans had converted death camp infrastructure into survival system through pure organizational capability and technological thinking applied to extreme circumstances. By June 1942, underground American networks had achieved systematic effectiveness that Japanese administrators couldn't comprehend, detect, or eliminate, despite complete awareness that prisoners were somehow surviving beyond calculated death timelines. June 1942, Camp O'Donnell. Lieutenant Colonel Tsuneyoshi confronted statistical impossibilities that violated every principle of calculated death camp administration. Medical projections predicted 90% American mortality by early June based on disease vectors, caloric deficiency, and systematic resource denial. Actual mortality rate 65%. The 25% survival differential represented hundreds of prisoners who should have died but maintained physical capability, defying mathematical probability. Japanese medical officers documented survival anomalies that indicated impossible coordination. Private Morrison, classified as terminal malnutrition case in early May, had somehow regained 15 pounds by mid-June despite unchanged official rations. Sergeant Chen, diagnosed with advanced dysentery expected to kill within days, recovered without medicine or treatment intervention. 6 other Americans showing identical recovery patterns despite zero access to medical supplies or additional nutrition through official channels. The Japanese response escalated through systematic countermeasures designed to identify and eliminate suspected underground networks. Camp administrators implemented surprise barracks inspections, searching sleeping areas for hidden food, contraband medicine, or smuggled supplies. Guards discovered nothing. Random prisoner transfers between barracks attempted to disrupt suspected communication channels. American coordination continued unaffected. Enhanced surveillance monitoring prisoner movements and interactions failed to detect distribution systems operating beneath constant observation. Most disturbing to Japanese administration, American morale was improving rather than deteriorating under pressure specifically designed to destroy psychological resistance. Prisoners maintained personal hygiene despite water scarcity, washing faces and attempting to stay clean when survival logic suggested abandoning all non-essential activities. Americans sang songs during evening periods, organized informal religious services, and demonstrated collective cohesion when individual desperation should have produced selfish survival behavior. Guard psychological impact became measurable through personnel rotation requests and declining enforcement enthusiasm. Japanese soldiers accustomed to prisoner compliance through brutal punishment confronted Americans who maintained military bearing despite systematic torture. Beatings that broke Filipino prisoners produced temporary compliance from Americans, followed by immediate return to coordinated resistance. Guards requested transfers from Camp O'Donnell duty, citing psychological stress from managing prisoners, demonstrating impossible resilience. The cultural shock deepened as Japanese administrators recognized their fundamental assumptions about American weakness were completely wrong. Prisoners separated from officer leadership maintained military discipline without command hierarchy. Americans raised in individualistic democratic society demonstrated collective organization exceeding Japanese expectations. The psychological warfare that should have produced broken individuals was generating unified resistance networks. Interrogation attempts revealed American psychological superiority under torture conditions. Guards beat prisoners suspected of smuggling food, demanding identification of network participants and distribution systems. Americans provided no intelligence. Enhanced interrogation techniques including extended isolation, food denial, and physical brutality failed to break prisoner coordination or extract information about underground operations. By late June 1942, Japanese frustration approached crisis levels. Camp administrators couldn't identify American distribution networks despite awareness they existed. Countermeasures failed to disrupt coordination observable through impossible survival rates. Guard morale declined while prisoner morale strengthened. Complete psychological reversal of predicted outcomes. The mathematical evidence became undeniable. American prisoners were surviving at rates exceeding Japanese calculations by statistically impossible margins. Disease transmission should have accelerated through June as heat intensified and sanitation degraded. Instead, infection rates stabilized. Malnutrition deaths should have peaked as accumulated caloric deficits reached fatal thresholds. Instead, mortality rates declined. Psychological breakdown should have produced individual survival behavior and network collapse. Instead, collective organization intensified. Japanese medical staff documented the impossible conclusion. American prisoners were healthier in June than May despite unchanged official conditions. Weight stabilization occurred among prisoners who should have shown progressive emaciation. Disease recovery happened without medical intervention. Morale improvement defied psychological warfare theory, predicting complete mental deterioration by this timeline. Most shocking was the realization that increased brutality was strengthening rather than weakening American resistance. Every beating, every punishment detail, every torture session seemed to reinforce prisoner unity instead of breaking it. The Japanese had created conditions that accidentally enhanced the exact American characteristics: collective problem solving, mutual support, organizational discipline. They intended to destroy. By the time Japanese administrators recognized their complete strategic failure, American underground networks had achieved such sophisticated effectiveness that detection and elimination were impossible without killing every prisoner. The death camp, designed to systematically eliminate captured Americans through mathematical precision, had been converted into survival system through American ingenuity operating at levels Japanese military culture couldn't comprehend. The psychological warfare victory belonged entirely to prisoners who transformed enemy advantages into tactical defeat through pure organizational superiority. June 1942, Camp O'Donnell closure. Japanese administrators transferred 3,800 surviving American prisoners to Cabanatuan prison complex, expecting that relocation would disrupt underground networks and complete the systematic elimination process. Instead, the transfers demonstrated the full strategic failure of Japanese psychological warfare. American survivors carried their organizational systems intact to Cabanatuan, immediately establishing food distribution networks, medical care coordination, and survival protocols within days of arrival. The underground expertise developed at O'Donnell spread throughout the new camp population, teaching recently captured corregidor prisoners the techniques that had defeated Japanese death camp engineering. What Japanese authorities intended as disruption became knowledge transfer that strengthened American resistance across the entire Philippine prison system. The survival statistics revealed strategic outcomes that Japanese military planning never anticipated. Of 9,200 Americans imprisoned at Camp O'Donnell, approximately 1,500 died during the 3-month period, an 84% survival rate under conditions mathematically designed to kill 90% within the same time frame. Transferred prisoners maintained physical capability and mental discipline that enabled continued survival through 3 additional years of captivity across multiple prison locations. Post-war analysis documented the organizational miracle American prisoners achieved. Overall, Pacific Theater POW mortality reached 40%, with Bataan survivors expected to exceed 50% death rates given their pre-capture malnutrition and death march trauma. Instead, organized American resistance at O'Donnell established survival foundations that reduced mortality below theater averages despite facing the worst initial conditions of any American POW population. January 30th, 1945, Liberation. When the 6th Ranger Battalion and Filipino guerrillas raided Cabanatuan prison complex, they discovered American prisoners who had maintained military organization through nearly 3 years of captivity. Survivors immediately provided intelligence about Japanese positions, coordinated evacuation movements, and demonstrated discipline that shocked rescue forces expecting broken men requiring extensive assistance. The underground networks that began at Camp O'Donnell had preserved fighting capability across the entire imprisonment period. War crimes prosecution revealed Japanese recognition of systematic failure. Captain Yoshio Tsuneyoshi faced charges for contributing to 1,161 American deaths at Camp O'Donnell. His November 1947 conviction acknowledged that deliberate death camp design constituted war crimes rather than legitimate prisoner management. The death sentence, later reduced to life imprisonment, represented historical judgment about Japanese strategy that attempted to destroy American prisoners through systematic brutality. The American achievement at Camp O'Donnell established principles that transformed modern military survival training: SEER, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Programs incorporated lessons learned from O'Donnell survivors. Collective organization outweighs individual survival attempts. Underground networks provide psychological strength against systematic torture, and American military discipline maintains effectiveness under conditions designed to destroy unit cohesion. The parallel to American industrial superiority proved undeniable. The same organizational thinking that converted automobile factories into aircraft production facilities transformed death camps into survivable environments through pure collective ingenuity. Japanese forces possessed physical control over every camp resource, while Americans controlled the invisible networks that rendered Japanese advantages obsolete. Historical analysis revealed the cultural blindness that guaranteed Japanese failure. Military doctrine emphasizing rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience prevented Japanese commanders from understanding American organizational flexibility. Democratic military training that Japanese leadership viewed as weakness, individual initiative, collective problem-solving, questioning authority, generated precisely the capabilities required for survival network development under extreme conditions. The strategic victory belonged entirely to American prisoners who proved that organizational superiority defeats physical brutality, collective genius overcomes systematic cruelty, and American military spirit remains unbreakable regardless of enemy advantages in violence and control. Camp O'Donnell represented the finest demonstration of American character under impossible circumstances. transformation of certain death into collective survival through pure organizational excellence that no enemy force could comprehend, detect, or eliminate. 1945, Manila War Crimes Trials. Japanese commandant Yoshio Tsuneyoshi stood before Allied prosecutors, confronting evidence that shattered every assumption about American psychological weakness. The death camp, designed to systematically eliminate captured Americans through scientific calculation, had failed completely against organizational capabilities Japanese military doctrine couldn't comprehend. The prosecution presented statistical evidence revealing impossible American achievement. Japanese medical calculations predicted 5,000 plus American deaths within the 3-month Camp O'Donnell period based on controlled variables: starvation rations, disease vectors, contaminated water, zero medical supplies, systematic brutality. Actual American deaths, 1,500, a 70% survival differential that violated every mathematical prediction. More shocking was the post-transfer analysis. American prisoners moved to Cabanatuan immediately established identical underground networks, teaching survival systems to newly captured corregidor personnel. The organizational genius Japanese administrators tried to destroy through camp closure had instead spread throughout the entire Philippine prison system. What should have been disruption became knowledge transfer that strengthened American resistance across all Japanese-controlled facilities. Allied interrogators documented Japanese recognition of complete strategic failure. Internal camp reports acknowledged that American prisoners maintained physical capability, mental discipline, and military organization despite conditions designed to produce total psychological breakdown. Guards had requested transfers citing inability to break American morale through techniques that reliably destroyed other prisoner populations. The cultural blindness proved decisive. Japanese military culture emphasizing rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience prevented commanders from understanding American organizational flexibility. Democratic training that Japanese leadership viewed as fatal weakness, individual initiative, collective problem solving, questioning authority, generated precisely the survival capabilities that rendered Japanese death camp engineering obsolete. American survivors returned home carrying medals recognizing achievements Japanese captors never comprehended. Bronze Stars, Prisoner of War medals, and Distinguished Service Crosses acknowledged not just survival, but organized resistance under the worst conditions American military personnel ever faced. Sergeant Jose Calugas, who survived Camp O'Donnell, received the Medal of Honor for earlier battlefield heroism, then joined Filipino guerrillas after release, demonstrating that imprisoned Americans emerged ready to fight rather than psychologically broken. The modern legacy proved the American achievement's enduring significance. SEER training incorporated Camp O'Donnell lessons as foundational principles. Collective organization defeats individual desperation. Underground networks provide psychological strength against systematic torture. And American military discipline maintains effectiveness under conditions designed to destroy unit cohesion. Historical analysis revealed the parallel to American industrial superiority that Japanese leadership never understood. The same organizational thinking that converted Detroit automobile factories into aircraft production facilities transformed death camps into survivable environments through pure collective ingenuity. Americans possessed invisible advantages: technological thinking, democratic cooperation, systematic problem solving that proved more decisive than Japanese physical control over every visible resource. The final statistics told the story Japanese commanders never wanted acknowledged. Overall Pacific Theater POW mortality, 40%. Camp O'Donnell, American mortality, 16% during the 3-month operational period. Less than half the expected rate despite facing the worst initial conditions of any American POW population. Survivors maintained military capability through 3 additional years of captivity, many living into their 80s and 90s to testify about American organizational genius defeating systematic Japanese cruelty. The shocking truth Japanese military leadership discovered too late. American prisoners were psychologically superior to their captors in every measure except capacity for violence. The death camp that should have eliminated captured Americans instead revealed fundamental American characteristics that no enemy force could break: collective genius, organizational flexibility, and unbreakable spirit that converted certain death into coordinated survival. Camp O'Donnell represented the finest demonstration of American military character: transformation of enemy advantages into strategic defeat through invisible networks, proving that American ingenuity, brotherhood, and discipline remain supreme under any conditions, establishing forever that American fighting spirit cannot be broken by any enemy regardless of their brutality, control, or mathematical certainty about victory.